Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Jeff Solon. I'm the superintendent of the Cheshire Public Schools and an ex officio member of the Cheshire School Building Committee. Those are words that I've waited 7 years to say, and I'm very excited to be here this evening as we initiate this next phase of the process to bring new school buildings to the Cheshire Public Schools, our students, and the community. Before we get started, I'm just going to call the roll. If you could just say here to acknowledge your attendance. Chris Daddy.
Here.
Richard Gussenberg. Here. Chuck Neth. Here. Dennis Rio. Here. Megan Rockwell. Here. Greg Rosenblatt. Here. Sarah Stevens-Morling. Here. Ex officio member Sean Kimball. Here. And I am also here. We have a full quorum this evening. If you could please join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I would ask for, just for the sake of facilitating this evening's meeting, if I could have a motion for a temporary chair of this evening's meeting. Mr. Gussenberg? Is there a second for that? Okay, Mr. Daddy is the second for that. Any discussion? Having none. All those in favor, again, the nomination for temporary chair, Jeff Solon be the temporary chair of this evening's meeting. All in favor? None opposed. It's unanimous. Thank you for that. And with that, we can move on to our formal agenda. I want to welcome again our community and thank in advance all of our folks here this evening, members of this body who've engaged in an application process. It was actually a fairly rigorous process for the community's benefit, that people submitted their information to a representative group of council and Board of Education members, were evaluated, and our team put together a really outstanding group to help shepherd our community through this project. With that, I'd like to begin on the far end and ask each member of our committee to introduce themselves. Mr. Daddy, would you begin?
So my name is Chris Daddy. I'm a resident of Cheshire for 20 plus years now. I'm excited to be on this committee. I've been looking to be active in town. I was a member several years back of the Building Code Board of Appeals. From there, I was a member of the Housing Authority. From there, I became active with the High School Booster Club. I was president for 3 years, secretary and some other officer, whatever. And when my kids graduated, that stopped. And that was a couple years ago. So now I'm excited to be back involved. My background and what I think I bring to this table is I'm currently a licensed professional electrical engineer. I work for a design firm called RZ Design Associates in Rocky Hill. We design all sorts of commercial projects, including schools. I have 2 of them that I worked on and designed the electrical for that are under construction. And I just hope that a little bit of that experience can help us out here.
My name is Chuck Neth. I was involved in the School Modernization Committee, putting the plan kind of together over the last several years. I chaired that committee towards the end, kind of got it to town council. And yeah, I'm really here just to kind of see the project through completion, kind of see a shovel go in the ground and some schools get built. So my background, I'm also a licensed professional engineer. I work mainly structural projects, heavy civil projects in the New York City metro area. So hoping to bring, again, some of that same experience, project management skills, and get these done.
I'm Megan Rockwell. This is my hometown, and I have a 3-year-old daughter who'll be starting schools in a couple of years. I currently work for a construction company doing mainly admin and then starting to do some project management responsibilities for them. I'm also taking classes in interior design, currently from RISD, although I'm applying right now at Fairfield for their master's program in interior design. To be able to take part in designing the school that my daughter will go to is just, I mean, it's really such, I'm very overwhelmed. So I just am excited to be here and looking forward to everything that I will learn from everyone that's within this room.
Rich Gussenberg. I presently sit on the Public Building Commission. I was a member of the School Modernization Committee where I chaired the Communications Subcommittee, a committee which gathered information from the school staff, and also was a member of the committee that visited other school systems. Previous member of the Board of Education. I have been a school administrator. I was an educator for 40 years, principal of an elementary school or several elementary schools for 30 plus years. So I know schools and I know education. While I was in Region 15, I also, Regional School District 15, I did a stint as the business manager and was in charge of the building committee for Region 15. In that job, I oversaw 3 multi-million-dollar projects, addition renovations to Pomperog Elementary School, additions to Pomperog High School, and shepherded through from beginning to end the building of the new Longmeadow Elementary School. That's about it.
Okay. Hi, I'm Greg Rosenblatt. My title at Cheshire is I have 3 daughters that went through the Cheshire Public Schools from kindergarten through 12th grade, all graduated out on their own now. My personal background is I have an engineering degree in material science and engineering, worked as an engineer for a number of years, then decided I'd rather write about it than do the work, so I became a patent attorney. I was with Wigan & Dana for about 25 years, recently retired July 1, although I am also an adjunct professor at Quinnipiac, teaching Quinnipiac Law, teaching computer and internet law.
Tough act to follow. Dennis Rio. I'm an architect by trade. I've been in Cheshire for about 30 years, and I still feel like a newcomer. I've been a member of the school business group for many, many years. Also a member of the Public Building Commission at one time. What I'm most proud of is being a committee member in Troop 92. You only volunteer 1 day a week, and that seemed like many, many years ago. Some of the work that I've done as an architect has involved many different facilities and buildings. Ones I'm most proud of, truly, is the addition to the Cheshire High School. Came in on time and on the budget. And hopefully we can achieve the same thing.
Hi, I'm Sarah Stevens Morling. I am just about to celebrate my 5th year living in Cheshire, and we love it. I have 3 kids, 2 of which who are enrolled in the public schools. I also have a 3-year-old daughter who will be attending shortly. So I'm really excited to get to work on something to just pay back a little bit of the amazing experience we've had with the Cheshire Public Schools. As far as what I'm hoping I can bring to this committee work, I currently am a senior critic, a faculty member at the Yale School of Art, where I also have an administrative appointment as the assistant dean for communications and digital media. So I oversee all of the digital technology at the school, including the infrastructure and procurement, et cetera, as well as the communications, so strategy, outreach, press relations, and things like that. So I'm hopeful both of those things will come in handy during the course of the committee work.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sean Kimball. I'm the town manager here in Cheshire. I'm very honored to be an ex officio member assisting in this process. My wife and I moved to Cheshire 9 years ago. I've been town manager for the last 4.5 years. So I've had the pleasure of seeing this project through both the school modernization effort and then into, and very pleased to see it through successful referendum passage, of course. Again, as the chief executive for the town, I oversee all of the non-school departments for the municipality. We have a wonderful team of professionals, and a variety of them will be helping us along the way. And I see myself as a little bit of a liaison to those staff members as well. And I'm also the proud parent of a Doolittle 6th grader and a Doolittle 2nd grader. So obviously a vested interest in the school system here, which we love here in Cheshire. So I just want to echo what Jeff said earlier too. Just thank you all so much for your willingness to serve in this important role. And we're excited of the great work we're going to get done together. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean. As you guys can see, I mean, this is really a talented and an eclectic group. I am very happy to join Sean as an ex officio member and serve as your support throughout this process. I've been the superintendent of schools for 7 years now. Prior to that, I was the assistant principal at Dodd Middle School, principal at Dodd Middle School, and principal at Cheshire High School. So I have a pretty broad experience over my 17 years in the Cheshire community, working in education. And I will later have the opportunity to introduce part of the brains of the operation, and between us and everybody else in the Cheshire Public Schools, I know that we'll certainly support your process and try and make this as easily navigated as possible for you. And so with that, I'm ready to transition to our next agenda item and want to welcome Jeff D'Onofrio, who is our legal representation for the town of Cheshire and has vast experience in supporting communities through this process of school construction, navigating all facets of that process, really. And so he's been gracious enough to join us here this evening to help walk you through what some of the roles and responsibilities as a school building committee member are. And with that, I'm happy to pass it over to you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Jeff D'Onofrio. I'm the town attorney for Cheshire for about 1.5 years now. For the last 32 years, I've been a municipal lawyer and a construction lawyer. I was actually a construction lawyer before I was a municipal lawyer. And right now, I'm either the town attorney or the construction attorney for 17 municipalities. I've done about 75 schools over the last 25 years, including all the surrounding towns. So, you know, really what is different about school construction in Connecticut that receives grant funding is that, well, first of all, you're a public agency. So we're going to talk about FOIA in a minute. Everything you do is governed by FOIA 24/7. The other part of it is it's heavily regulated. In other words, by virtue of applying for and hopefully receiving a grant for each of these projects, you'll be responsible for not only complying with the Connecticut general statutes and the Connecticut regulations for the Department of Administrative Services, but also with the requirements of the Office of School Construction Grants and Review. So it's a very, I won't say fluid, because it does take a while before they make changes, but they're on every couple of years, there's a whole new set of rules that come out, usually as a result of post-project completion audits. So as Jeff mentioned at the onset, at your next meeting, you should elect a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary. And the secretary should be whoever is going to keep your minutes. Okay, and the minutes are a very important document in the post-completion audit 15 years from now. Because a lot of the key decisions are scrutinized in the audit process, including change orders. Okay, so the secretary plays an important role. And then you'll also want to think about down the road subcommittees. Typically, the subcommittees that we see on a building committee are finance. They would review the monthly payment application, which is a very significant undertaking, as well as the rest of the bills, and then eventually deal with change orders. Some building committees like to appoint a separate FF&E subcommittee to deal with furniture, fixture, and equipment recommendations, so that the entire committee doesn't have to look at samples of things like chairs and rugs and finishes. But some building committees like to be fully engaged in that. Some building committees will appoint a safety and security committee. After Sandy Hook in 2012, there was a Public Act 13-3, which sets forth very specific school safety and security infrastructure requirements. And over the last 9 years, what's emerged from that is essentially a separate code. We have school construction infrastructure requirements that have to be adhered to by the design team when you ultimately select the design team. And there's going to be choices that have to be made on a whole variety of issues. And either the building committee will convene an executive session to discuss those items, or a subcommittee will convene an executive session to discuss those items. But that's something that you have plenty of time to think about, because until you have an architect and you start getting into design, you don't have to really worry about any of those items yet. And then the last subcommittee that I see sometimes, I would say 100% of the time, we see finance subcommittees, probably 75% of the time, security and FF&E subcommittees, and about half the time, a legal subcommittee. So if there's disputes, if there's potential problems with any of the vendors that you engage, and you want to have conversations outside of the full building committee, just because of, sometimes there's in between meetings, there's issues that need to be addressed in preparation for the next meeting. And sometimes it makes sense to have like a 3-person subcommittee. Keep in mind that all the subcommittees are public agencies, okay? Which takes me into FOIA, all right? Everything you do is governed by the Connecticut Freedom of Information Act. And the Freedom of Information Act is relatively easy to understand if you just focus on the fact that it applies to public meetings and public records of public agencies. So you're a public agency. Any subcommittee of the building committee is a public agency, okay? All of your meetings are public unless they fall under a category of executive session. And we'll talk about what that means in a minute. But every meeting has to be noticed. You'll need to get, sometime this month or early next month, you'll need to put together a schedule of regular meetings. And that needs to get filed by January 31st. And then those agendas need to be posted no later than 24 hours prior to the meeting, which means you need to get them into whoever's going to be responsible in town hall for posting them a few days ahead of time. So if you're going to meet on Wednesday nights, you want to make sure that you get the agenda pretty much finalized by Friday, right? The key premise behind FOIA is transparency, right? You're doing the people's business. The people's business should be done in public. So the deliberative process, the process of governing, should be open to the public. And as individuals, even though you're now all town officials and you're subject to the town's code of ethics, individually you have no authority to do anything. Your authority comes from sitting in a quorum at a properly noticed meeting, okay? If you wanted to delegate authority to somebody, for example, when you pick your chair, there's going to be a whole slew of things that come up in between meetings. And so you're going to want to come up with an authority delegation to that chair for things that happen in between meetings. And then you'll ratify the chair's action at your next meeting. But it's important to understand that your authority and your jurisdiction comes from when you're sitting at a properly noticed meeting with a quorum. If you don't have a quorum, it's not a meeting. You can't do any agency business, okay? In terms of executive sessions, okay? Executive sessions are limited to a very narrow group of topics, especially when it comes to a building committee, because you don't have personnel matters, because you don't have any employees, okay? You'll have safety and security matters. You may have matters related to pending or threatened claims and litigation, and that's pretty much it, all right? Executive sessions can only be convened upon a 2/3 vote of the building committee. And if somebody wants to convene an executive session, if it's a regular meeting and you don't have it on your agenda, you can amend your agenda at a regular meeting upon 2/3 vote. You cannot amend an agenda at a special meeting. Only the business in the agenda can be discussed at that special meeting. But if you wanted to convene an executive session at a regular meeting and it's on your agenda or it's not on your agenda and you put it on your agenda by 2/3 vote, then it's a motion to convene an executive session to discuss a threatened claim by the electrical subcontractor. And in addition to the members of the building committee, we invite the town attorney. So you have to identify what you're convening an executive session to do and who besides the members of the public agency are invited into the executive session. Then once you're in executive session, everything discussed in executive session is confidential, whether there's a lawyer in there or not. It's a matter of law. It's an executive session. The public's been excluded. So again, fundamental tenet of FOIA, right? If all of the public is excluded, then all of the public is excluded. So you can't, tell somebody who wasn't in executive session what transpired in executive session, because then you're picking and choosing who from the public gets to know what the rest of the public was denied access to, okay? Keep in mind, there's 3 kinds of meetings, but really for your purposes, there's 2. There's regular meetings, which will be those meetings that you decide to put on your list that you give to the town clerk. And there's special meetings. Special meetings can be called upon 24 hours notice. For notice purposes, weekends and holidays don't count. So if you decide on a Friday that you want to have a special meeting on Monday at 5 p.m., then before 5 p.m. on Friday, that agenda has to be posted, okay? Minutes of your meetings have to be made available to the public within 7 days of your meeting. So sometimes you'll be posting draft minutes. And that's okay. If changes get made to the minutes, the revised minutes will get posted as the final minutes. One of the issues that comes up, especially with respect to building committees and the FOIA meeting requirements, is email, okay? Because you'll be receiving a tremendous amount of information via email. You'll get information from the construction manager, you'll get information from the owner's rep, you'll get information from the architect. And the problem with receiving information is people feel a need to respond. No responding, because you'll have an illegal meeting. If there's a quorum of building committee members on an email and one person replies by saying, I don't think we should approve this change order, you're now having an illegal meeting because you're discussing agency business in a setting that hasn't been noticed and obviously the rest of the world doesn't have access to. So no email meetings, okay? With regard to public records, most documents, including emails and text messages that you receive, are public records. I think I overheard that you all now have town email accounts. So those are the accounts that you should use. You shouldn't use personal email accounts for doing building committee business. Keep in mind that all of those emails are public records. The town or Board of Ed, I don't know whose domain it is, but it'll be on the town server. and subject to state record retention requirements. Okay. And, you know, we will get FOI requests. You'll get FOI requests when you get into procurement, when somebody doesn't get hired and they're unhappy. You'll get asked about, you know, communications between building committee members concerning procurement, which there really shouldn't be any. Everything should be here. Okay. So, I mean, that's kind of, you know, high level for you. There's all kinds of little nuances and issues that come up. I'm a resource for you. This is what I do. This is what I've done for the last 32 years. Don't ever hesitate. There's no stupid questions. I know that's cliche, but there's going to be a lot of things that come up when you're building two schools, especially once you get into procurement. And like I said, it's very, very heavily regulated. And the goal here is we follow the law 100% of the time because we want to maximize the town's grant reimbursement. Ultimately, you don't know what you're getting reimbursed until the audit's over, because you get reimbursed 50% is your rate on these projects of eligible costs. And the determination of eligible costs isn't adjudicated until the post-completion audit. But what we need to do to make sure that we maximize the likelihood that these costs will be eligible is follow the law 100% of the time. So if you ever have a question about whether we need to do something different or whether what we're doing is correct, just ask me. Call me, email. You can email me. Our emails are privileged, okay? So we're not having a meeting when you're emailing back and forth to the lawyer, all right? In the materials, I'm not going to go through all the materials. You'll be happy to know that my idea when I create this document for you, there's a lot of grant information in here. And the reason I want you to have it is because as you go through the grant process, and I'll give you kind of a 3-minute, sequence outline in a couple of minutes, but I want you to have something you can look at so that when you hire an architect and the architect spearheads the grant process for you, I want you to be familiar with what's going on. Even if they tell you, you may be sitting at home one night and say, gee, we got our design development review approved. Does that mean we're good to go? And then you can look and say, no, he says we have to get a PCR before we can go out to bid. Okay. But, I have some real common sense suggestions here, but I say them anyway because I'm a little OCD about it. My number one rule is only deal with qualified, experienced, responsible professionals. And I'm telling you right now, some of my projects where I get brought in post-procurement, the professionals are not competent. So you hire an architect that's built schools before. You hire a construction manager that's built schools before. You check all the references. You look at their success in terms of schedule and budget management. You vet the whole team. I mean, it's painstaking and it's tedious, but the firms are only as good as the teams. You could hire a $5 billion a year world-class publicly traded construction manager and get the Q team instead of the A team. Okay. So when I talk about dealing with qualified, experienced, responsible professionals, I don't just mean the firms. I mean the individuals all the way across the board: the architect, the CM, the owner's rep, the special inspector, the materials testing, the commissioning agent, all the way across the board. These are very desirable projects. There's not a heck of a lot of other big projects going on in Connecticut, at least not if you carve out Fairfield County. Stanford's building a $300 million high school. So you're going to get a lot of competition. Okay. You're going to have your pick of qualified professionals. So you're going to really want to, spend the time to vet them and score them and evaluate them correctly. And I can help you with different criteria and matrices and things like that. I teach construction law seminars, and I'm also a mediator and an arbitrator in construction cases. So I get asked the same question all the time by owners. what's the secret? What's the key to a successful project? What's the one thing? And it really is communication. And I tell construction managers and architects all the time, listen, don't create unreasonable expectations. If you're in an interview and the owner asks you, do you think our schedule is realistic? And you say, oh yeah, we can probably beat it by 2 months. You better make sure that you can do that, okay? If on the other hand, internally, when you're putting together your proposal, you think this schedule's crazy, and given what's going on with supply chain and availability of labor and other issues, it's not real. You got to tell them up front. And whenever you have bad news, communicate it timely and come with a suggested solution or two. Don't just back up the truck and dump the bad news on the building committee. They're volunteers, they're lay people. So communication. And the difference between the successful project and the distressed project is how the team deals with the challenges. Because every project has challenges, every single one of them. And I've seen building committees that, collaborate and work with the team to get through the challenges. And I've seen, breakdowns in relationships or early in projects because of finger pointing and playing the blame game. The reality is there's going to be problems. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be issues that come up on all fronts because construction involves a large number of people, and people are flawed. People make mistakes. They make mistakes when they design projects. They make mistakes when they supervise the building of a project, and they make mistakes when they build a project. But if we plan everything correctly, then you'll meet your 3 goals: budget, quality, schedule. They're inextricably intertwined goals on every construction project, going back to the Romans, okay? So if you communicate and you send that message, that's the message you send. When the architects come in and they're interviewing with you, when your CMs and your commissioning agents and your owners reps are in, you tell them, we're not afraid of bad news. Bring it on. But don't just bring us the bad news. Bring us the suggested solutions too, okay? So if you work as a team, understanding that you're going to get frustrated sometimes, and it is a lot of hard work, you'll find that you will have very successful projects, and you'll exceed all of your expectations in terms of the final quality of what you build and what you deliver to the Cheshire community for the next half century, okay? In the materials on pages 8 and 9, I list for you your pre-construction consultants, okay? The architect, CM, owner's rep, soil scientist, geotech, environmental. These are all consultants that you will engage directly, okay? The architect will engage some sub-consultants, mechanical and electrical engineers specifically, but you'll engage the architect, the CM, the owner's rep, the geotech, environmental, special inspector required by code, independent materials testing required by code. And when you procure each of these consultants, you'll do so in compliance with state statute, okay? Because we actually have a state statute that tells us that for school construction projects receiving a state grant, here's what the process is. And it ain't the normal process, okay? Up until 2007, all trade contractors had to be procured using a public bidding, competitive bidding process. No big deal. Lowest qualified responsible bidder. 2007, the legislature decided that they wanted to extend that process to the hiring of architects and construction managers. The first year, it was a disaster because the legislature did not understand that when you hire an architect and you hire a construction manager, they're not bidding on a set of documents. They don't even know what you're building. So to ask them to give you a price, it's dead on arrival. So I was involved in one of the early cases where an architect was rejected And after that, the legislature changed to the current structure, which is RFQ, list of not more than 4, RFP. So you issue a request for qualifications, and you have to do this not only for the architect and the CM, but also for the owner's rep and the commissioning agent, okay? And that's really the sequence. The first professional you want to hire is an architect, okay? Because your long lead items are what you need as deliverables to the state, starting with schematic design and your schematic design estimate, okay? But that's the process. Request for qualifications. You'll score the respondents, okay, that are responsive and qualified. And then from that, a list of not more than 4, you'll send an RFP to. You'll get their proposals. You'll do a weighted criteria. You'll score and you'll select. The statute tells you what the considerations are in terms of making your decision in response to proposals. Okay. So that's really your big lift for a while is going to be procurement. Because like I said, you'll probably get 7, 8, 9 architects that'll respond, and you'll probably get about 10 to 12 CMs, half of which won't meet the most basic qualification requirements in terms of building similarly sized school projects in the state of Connecticut in the last however many years you want to go back, 5, 10 years. Okay. If you look at pages 9 and 10 of the materials, I cover the types of subjects that you'll be dealing with during the pre-construction and construction phases. Okay. Just because I know Dennis and I dealt with each other professionally a while back in a good way. Yeah, same side. But I didn't know in terms of the audience, how familiar you are with school construction projects. So I just give you a very back of the envelope outline of the types of issues that you'll deal with both in the pre-construction and construction phases. Really, from a building committee perspective, once you get to the construction phase, it's a huge relief because now you know what you're building and you have a pretty good idea what it's going to cost and when it's going to be done, right? And the rest of the materials, pages 11 through 34, it's all pretty much state grant. And again, it's not something that I'm looking to talk about tonight. It's not something that you need to read this month, but during the course of the project, you're going to hear a lot of terms. You're going to wonder about the sequence. You're going to wonder what's next after you leave a meeting. And you're going to wake up in the middle of the night and worry about whether you're doing something right. And I wanted to give you kind of a playbook that you could go to and say, oh, gee, is this eligible? Or were we supposed to do something before we went out to bid? What about what's the expectation for progress payments? And just, this is pretty much what to expect from the grant process. The first milestone is December 15th. Okay, December 15th, Department of Administrative Services sends their priority list to the governor, the legislature, and OPM. And the legislative committee reviews and submits to the full General Assembly February 1st. In the meantime, you'll be in your procurement of the design professional because what you need to do to get the ball rolling with OSCGR is make a schematic design submittal, which will be your schematic design documents and your ASTM level 2 cost estimate based on schematic design. And you'll have OSCGR will meet with you and the design team to review schematic design. And then after they give you the green light, you'll go to design development review. You'll meet with them again. And then once you have your 100% construction docs, you'll have a PCR, pre-bid conference review. Can't go out to bid without a letter authorizing you to go out to bid. So the design team will schedule those meetings well in advance and then work towards having those documents ready for Board of Ed review. Because after you approve schematic design, Board of Ed approves it. After you approve design development documents, Board of Ed approves it. After you approve the construction documents that are going to hit the street and go out to bid, Board of Ed approves it. So, there's a lot sequentially that we have to keep on track with. And once you have your team in place, and you have a schedule in front of you, it'll seem less daunting. And it'll work like clockwork because we have a good group here. Am I talking too much? No?
Whatever you need.
I mean, the main thing here is as stuff comes up, you could just send me an email or call me anytime. I mean, this is what I do all day. So if I'm not doing this, something's wrong with my day. It means I have jury duty or something crazy. Any questions so far? Yes, sir.
Just a quick question. You said that as each of these timelines come up, it goes to the Board of Ed. What goes to the town council with everything?
What'll go to the town council is when you start awarding contracts. You'll make a recommendation to award to an architect. That'll go to the town council. You'll
The board first, or does it
just goes to the council. Yeah.
Second question, I don't know whether this is for you, for Jeff, or whatever, but you mentioned that somebody would be elected the secretary of the minutes. I've been on several different committees and organizations in the town. The town has always provided somebody who kept the minutes, a staff person, to allow the people of the committee itself to focus on the work. Is that?
Yes. We'll have a dedicated individual. The secretary's work will be important in the sense that they'll review that information, communicate with the body. And, I've certainly been to many meetings outside of our Board of Education where the minutes get distributed and it's just kind of a pro forma adoption. Here we will want to scrutinize those a little bit in greater detail.
But the key to me is
We'll
the
have,
boss won't be.
exactly. Yeah, one person won't be wholly responsible for that.
And that's true in the subcommittees. You would have somebody in the school modernization, will be a subcommittee meetings. Are all the meetings required to be videotaped also? Because
I don't know that they're required to, but we do that.
thought the town required.
So we do provide that.
There's a requirement that they're audio recorded, but we're going to make every effort to have, whether it's some subcommittees may not be able to be videotaped depending on the circumstances or if it's a site visit or something, but certainly the minutes are the official written record of the meeting, and that's it.
One thing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You had mentioned several things where there was, when we're interviewing the design team, there's a process and it's laid out and all that. Safe to assume you'll be providing us with the guidance on that ahead of time?
I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'll draft an RFQ for you and go through it with you. And see, one of the things I was just going to say is you need to decide the project delivery method. Okay? I can tell you what the options are, and I can tell you what everybody else does and why. Okay? I mean, you basically have, let's say there's 4 design delivery methods. Design build. You can't do design build of a school in Connecticut, not with a grant. So forget about that. Okay. Design bid build. You can go with a general contractor, which is you have 100% CDs. You put those on the street and you get a hard bid from a GC. The GC holds all the subcontracts, right? You can go with a construction manager at risk. A construction manager at risk, if you're familiar with that term, simply means that you hire a construction manager. That construction manager is the constructor. So they serve essentially as a general contractor. They hold all the trade contracts, but they also provide construction management services to you, right? Pre-construction services that a GC does not provide. And they also would have a fiduciary duty to you, which a general contractor does not have, okay? The at-risk, what that means is they're at risk for something called the GMP, guaranteed maximum price, and they're at risk for a schedule. So the way it works is you do the RFQ, you do the RFP, you hire a construction manager. You're going to want to hire the construction manager right after you hire the architect. You want the construction manager early in the design phase because they can provide maximum value engineering input if they're brought in early, okay? And they can also provide scheduling and budgeting assistance early on. You don't want the schematic design estimate that goes to OSCGR with the schematic design submission to not have been developed in conjunction with the construction manager. Because then what happens is a CM inherits a budget they didn't work on, and you start going backwards from day one, okay? But most municipalities in Connecticut build schools using a construction manager at risk. It provides more transparency than a general contractor. It's basically an open book form of contracting. And you also receive construction management services that you don't receive in the pre-construction phase from a GC. And then the last form of project delivery, which I disregard and don't respect as a project delivery method, is construction manager advisor. Construction manager advisor is when the owner hires a construction manager, not as a constructor and not at risk for anything, but just as an advisor. The owner then essentially serves as the general contractor and bids the work and holds the trade contracts. I'm telling you, I've represented municipalities in litigation several times when they serve as a CMA. There's not a municipality in the state of Connecticut that has the staff to manage even a $10 million construction project as a GC. So it's a big mistake. If you're adding a classroom, okay, you know, if you're doing an HVAC project, or you're doing a roof replacement or a window replacement, fine, the municipality can hold the trade contracts. It's not a big deal. But for a project where you're probably going to have on each of these projects 26 to 30 subcontractors of all tiers, okay, there's no way the municipality can handle invoicing and supervising and scheduling and sequencing and coordinating work without getting sued, okay? So really what it comes down to is, do you want a GC or do you want a CM at risk? And nobody's really doing schools in Connecticut anymore using GCs because everybody wants the pre-construction phase help and everybody wants the GMP. The open book nature of the invoicing when you have a CM at risk is also very attractive because the building committee feels like they know where the money's being spent and what the contractor's up to. And from an audit perspective, they're used to the audits. So that would be my recommendation, but you don't have to decide that tonight.
Can you talk a little bit, Jeff, about where owner's representation comes into that?
The owner's rep, I'm a big fan of owner's reps. I think that going back to my point about municipalities are not set up to manage construction. A lot of you folks have experience in the construction industry. People that don't have experience in the construction industry that sit on building committees will always say to me, we're hiring an architect. We're hiring a construction manager. What do we need an owner's rep for? And the answer is there's a gap. There's things that the architect can't do for you, either because they don't have the expertise or it's not a basic service under their contract, and you wouldn't want to pay for it as an additional service. You don't want the architect being the only one reviewing the payment applications. You don't want the architect being the arbiter of every dispute. It creates too much tension between the design team and the construction team, okay? Change order review. There's going to be times where there's an error or omission in the construction documents. The architect usually isn't going to tell you. Sometimes they will, but more often than not, they're not going to say to you, hey, this change order is my fault. So one of the things that you'll have an owner's rep do is create a log from day one that has every change order that's approved on the job, whether it was due to program owner directed change, you added something, whether it was due to design error, whether it was due to trade contractor error. And the reason we want that log is there's a statute in Connecticut that requires that your contract with the architect hold the architect to what's called the highest prevailing standard of care. Now, nobody knows what that means. I have a pretty good idea because I've had E&O claims. So if I find a job where the E&O is less than 0.5%, which I have, okay, and I have change orders due to design E&O in excess of that, then that's a deviation from the standard of care. So I have an expert that I use on standard of care, right? Because again, eligible costs that are due to someone's negligence are not eligible for reimbursement. Costs that are due to a CM or architect's failure to fulfill the fundamental contract responsibility are not a cost of the work, not eligible for reimbursement. So it's not just about sitting here and nitpicking and saying, you screwed this up and you screwed that up. It's about maximizing eligibility for reimbursement, right? And the contracts that you'll enter into with the vendors will all say that 3 or 4 times, because I'm OCD about it, right? That they have to maximize your eligibility for reimbursement and that they don't get reimbursed if you don't get reimbursed. So, it's all kind of a common theme, which is budget, quality, schedule. Okay. And, the professionals that are in this market understand all this. So none of this comes as a shock to anybody. And what I do when we issue the RFP, we're going to provide the proposed contract. Okay. When you issue an RFP for an architect, for a CM, for an owner's rep, we'll provide the proposed contract and they'll see all the edits to the boilerplate that we make to protect the town. And we'll have, when they submit a proposal, they'll have to sign an acknowledgement saying that they've reviewed the proposed contract. And if awarded the job, they'll sign the contract without modification or alteration within 5 days of award. So that way we don't get into this back and forth negotiation, that you get into when you're talking about, 75-page contracts. But in terms of the sequence of hiring an owner's rep, it really depends on the scope that you want from the owner's rep. And there's basically 3 different scopes that I see. One is the full service owner's rep. You bring them in during the design phase. They're at all the value engineering meetings between the architect and the owner and the CM. They go to all the meetings with you at OSCGR. They help you with procurement, and they're just there right from the beginning as part of the team. That's probably 20% of the time, right? The next is you bring them on for the construction phase. So they begin, once you award bids and a shovel hits the ground, your owner's rep is on board. And then it's a question of what you want the scope to be. Do you want somebody that's just doing paperwork, or do you want somebody that's in the field a couple days a week? I would recommend that you have somebody who's in the field a couple days a week so they know what the heck's going on when they're reviewing the paperwork, okay? And the other thing is they can flag issues. Subs will talk to them and say, I can't get my work done because the drywall guy hasn't done his work. There's communication that happens. They'll confide in the owner's rep. Maybe they don't want to confide in the CM because they were told, look, don't tell the CM anything because they're just going to back charge us and they're going to hold us liable for it or make a bond claim, right? So having the owner's rep available during the construction phase in the field is a good thing. And then the third way is what I call the cheap way, which is you hire somebody during the construction phase for 20 hours a week and you don't get any value out of it. You might as well not do it at all. The owner's rep is reimbursable at the project rate. Okay. You can only have one. That's was an issue a couple of times on a couple of projects where they hired multiple owners reps because they didn't procure it correctly. But, my advice would be to have a discussion, at some point in the next month and a half or so about, do you want somebody in the pre-construction phase or do you want somebody just in the construction phase? And I can kind of help you figure out what the cost difference would be, once we get a handle on how long pre-con's going to be. Yes, sir.
Since we're dealing with two schools, have you had a situation where one architect has been hired for both, or where two separate architects have been hired for? the two-
I have. Yeah, I had one town that did 11 schools at once. One architect, one CM. It was a challenge. Keep in mind, these are two separate projects, two separate grants. So even if you were to hire, I'm doing two schools in Hamden right now with the same architect and same CM. But even if you hire the same or different, they're going to be separate contracts. Everything's separate.
Do you recommend having the same architect doing both?
I don't recommend having the same architect do both, but I think you have to provide it as an alternate so that you can consider it. In other words, give us a price for doing one, give us a price for doing both. And, take a look and see whether, because price statutorily, you have to consider price, and you get asked a lot of, even though it's more of a QBS qualitative based selection system under the statute, in the audit, it's one of the first things the auditors ask you is, why didn't you hire a low bidder? Even though the statute says price isn't the only consideration. But auditors are squirrely about not going with the lowest bidder. But I don't recommend using the same architect for both. I think you're better off with separate architects. Yes, sir.
As far as that final audit goes, that we talked about, meeting minutes, and do we need to compartmentalize our meetings? Like, we're gonna talk about one now, and here's the agenda, and then when we're done with that, we're gonna start with the other one?
Yeah, they'll be separate. They should be separate on the agenda. Some municipalities, like I'm working with North Branford, for example, they've got 4 projects going on right now. If you look at one of their agendas, the high school is 1, the intermediate school roof is 2, the police station is 3, and that's how they deal with them. Everything is separated on the agenda by project, and then the minutes correspond to the agenda. What else? But the main thing in the short term, after you select your officers, is to get on the procurement of the architect. Because like I said, it's a 2-step process. And I know some towns are combining the RFQ and RFP, but that's not what the statute says. The statute's very specific.
How much time do you give for that RFP?
Well, the RFQ, a statement of qualifications is kind of canned, So ordinarily I would give 30 days or less on the RFQ and then 30 days or less on the RFP. Because by the time they're done with the RFQ process, they have some familiarity with the project. And then it's just a question of putting numbers together. Because what you're going to get from an architect is you're going to get a price for schematic design phase, a price for design development phase, a price for construction documents phase, a price for bidding, and a price for the contract administration phase. So it's going to be a price, comprised of 5 components. But it'll take you, after you get the statements of qualifications, everybody, you'll have a couple of meetings where you'll go through them, unless you want to have a marathon and do them all in one night. And then you have your short list, and then you send that out. 30 days is enough time.
And that discussion is done in open session?
I mean, you can do the interviews in open session. I mean, the scoring really should be done in executive session. Yeah. And the proposals in terms of FOIA and whatnot, until you award contracts, they're not disclosed. So those proposals don't become public records until you award a contract under FOIA.
Do the RFQs get posted, say, to a public bulletin board that anyone can respond? Or is it the 6 or 8 architects we pick and send it to?
The RFQ gets posted, has to be published in the newspaper. And my recommendation is to also put it on the town website, and it goes on the DAS contracting portal as well. And then anybody can respond. And then once you shortlist to not more than 4 firms, you'll send the RFP to those 4 firms. The RFP will not be posted anywhere.
Is the scoring matrix for the RFQ, then that's something that's already provided, or is that something you come up with the weighted values for?
You come up with it. I can give you a sample. And you could, the considerations are in the statute. How much weight you give to them is up to you. For example, some building committees give 25% weight to price. Some give 50%. Some give 75%. So really it comes down to saying, okay, how much weight do we want to give to each of these 5 factors? And then there's no subjectivity in scoring price. I mean, that's the easy thing about the weight you give to price is the number's the number. Everything else in terms of qualifications and experience with similar projects and references, there's a lot of subjectivity that goes into that, which is why we do a matrix, so we have a record of how we did it.
When do we have to get the RFQ out? What's our-
Well, I don't know. What's your schedule? I mean, it really depends what you have in mind in terms of a schedule.
So there is a draft schedule in your folder in terms of a timeline. The other consideration, as Jeff mentioned, is the owner's representative. And having some conversations, this is the largest project that Cheshire's ever embarked upon. That we recognize that this won't be the only project that Cheshire ever does. After this, I mean, there will likely ultimately, assuming life goes on, we'll continue to look at other buildings, whether they be municipal or educational in the community. It's important that we do this very well. And so, the consideration in that process of an owner's rep who has vast experience and can dedicate their time and knowledge of the process to us to support us in that process is also worthy of significant consideration. I mentioned earlier that I was joined this evening. I'll introduce and ask him to give you just a little bit of background on his role and experience with the Cheshire Public Schools to talk about owners' representatives and what a request for proposal might look like. I introduce our Chief Operating Officer of the Cheshire Public Schools, Vincent Massiana. Welcome, Vin.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And welcome and congratulations to all the committee members. I've been the Chief Operating Officer for 13 years when I joined the Cheshire Public Schools. And so my responsibilities include everything from the budget and finance and human resources and payroll. So all the financial side, the capital budget that we work on, including, this project as well. But I'm also responsible for the facilities that we currently have and transportation services, technology service, food services for the district. So all the back office items that the educators shouldn't have to deal with, those are the responsibilities that I have with my team. Among other things, I am very heavily involved in all the requests for proposals and invitations for bid. And so I will be serving as a resource to this committee when we do these various RFPs or invitations to bid. And I know Rich Gussenberg and Chuck Neff, they were on the School Modernization Committee. We did issue an RFP. We hired Colliers as an owner's rep during the development of the plan that ultimately led to the voter referendum to build 2 new schools. So what I was going to talk about briefly tonight, which Jeff D'Onofrio and the committee have already talked about quite a bit, is owner's rep and really and the timing of the owner's rep. The suggestion, that I have is that we hire the owner's rep first. And I know Jeff probably has an opinion about whether we should do that. The thought process being that we hire the owner's rep. The owner's rep helps us with the planning, design, and ultimately construction, but they're in at a time before we go out to RFQ and RFP for the architects. So they're with us from day one through the end of construction. And fortunately on the agenda, the agenda item does say discussion of owner's rep. So Jeff, I don't know if you want to kind of weigh in on your thoughts about doing the owner's rep. And the key thing, and one of the reasons for this recommendation, as Jeff said, is it's reimbursable. So, in my mind, it's something that we want to take advantage of and not try and save a few dollars because we want the projects to be done well.
I think it really depends on, your schedule, because the architect drives everything. Because your process with OSCGR is totally dictated by the design submissions, the schematic design and the design development and the construction documents. Those are the three key meetings that you have with the state. So you really need to get the architect on board first. If you want to do an architect and an owner's rep at the same time, I think that's fine. But if you're gonna wait till you have an owner's rep, you're not gonna have an owner's rep for like 3 months, because by the time you do the RFQ, the RFP, the award, and the contract, it's gonna be 3 months. So you're gonna lose 3 months if you don't have an architect, and then the owner's rep comes aboard. That means you're not going to have an architect for 6 months. I don't know what you had in mind in terms of when you wanted the design phase to start, but that would be the only issue I would have with having the owner's rep on board before you have the architect. And really, there isn't anything for the owner's rep to do, because until you have a design, you can't have meaningful conversations about budget or schedule because you don't have anything to build. So what are the only thing for the owner's rep to do would be help you hire an architect, and
Right.
they're not. I work with Chuck a lot, Chuck Warrington. He's going to send me the stuff to draft anyway, so, because they're not lawyers, and the RFQ, RFP process is dictated by statute. So I don't have any issue with having the owner's rep involved at the onset of the project, but I think if you're going to go that road, you should do them contemporaneously. Yeah.
Simultaneously.
Yeah.
Yep.
Quick question, because in looking at the schedule, we're really spreading things out from the beginning of the project. Is there a reason why the OPM, the architect, and the CM can be just kind of front-loaded in the first 3 months, so
No.
that we pick one right after
Yeah,
the other?
there's no reason for that. Now, this, what you see in the folder, the updated macro schedule, is a draft schedule that was completed in essence as we terminated our work with the owner's rep through the preparation process. Entirely flexible at this point, and in consideration of Jeff's feedback, likely that, you guys may recommend pursuing an owner's rep and architect simultaneously, getting RFQs together and getting them out ASAP on both fronts, if you want to go that route. But this is not set in stone by any stretch, the macro schedule that's in the folder, just a draft. And Jeff hasn't seen that. And shame on Jeff and Jeff for sitting next to each other at the end of the table, making it difficult. Which Jeff are we talking about here? Any questions for Vin on that piece? Anything else to add, Vin?
No, I think that it's, it's up to the committee to decide which way to go. We'll provide all the resource and certainly you can count on me for the things that you need.
Thank you. I did mention the resource folder is Jeff advocated. We do have an email address for each of you that's first name dot last name at cheshire.k12.ct.us. In your folder, you'll see appointments to school building committee. That group is identified there for you for contact information. I only took the liberty of highlighting Sean's email address because he's got a different extension. My email is just first initial last name as well. Just little things to make note of. In this folder, there's some history. You've heard people reference the School Modernization Committee that painstakingly, with the support of the Town Council and Board of Education, worked through a process of evaluating a myriad of options to ultimately settle on these two options. We're not obviously going to rehash that. We have a commitment to build the two schools that were identified through that process. And it's important for you to become a little familiar with, there are two documents in there. One is dated April 21, 22. Actually, they both start with April 21, 22. And one is for the North End Elementary, which corner of Marion and Jarvis has not been named yet. And then the other is for Norton. The educational specifications that we submit to the state are what is being forwarded for grant approval. So those two buildings, as they've been outlined there, as I understand it, Jeff, and please correct me if I'm off base here, are what we are dedicating to build through this process. Fair enough?
That's a great point. Yep.
So within that folder, you'll see some other things that I would just highlight for you. The committee charge document, basically the role of the committee members. There are some test fits. Test fits are not, I just want to make this point, that they are not the building plan. They are a couple of different designs to illustrate that the building could fit on that property. So it's not like we have to select one of those. We'll work with the architect to design the appropriate building but we just needed to show the state that it would fit on that property. Other than that, there are a couple of other items in there, an RFQ for owner's rep. These are some things that have been used before for proposals asking for qualifications from different firms that may ultimately represent us through this process. Again, I would advocate for that, given that the scope of this project and the lack of experience that we have as a community navigating this process, that we strongly consider an owner's representative and we engage in that process, as Jeff said, contemporaneously with the architectural solicitation as well. So another item in there, because you'll probably be asked as a member of this committee, there's a proposed redistricting map that was designed in 2020. Those are not hard and fast, but that was at the time that the enrollment study was conducted, the recommendation in order to get the size of the buildings. So they are probably pretty close to final product, but not final product. So if, when I get asked, and I have been asked numerous times through the process, all right, where will my kids go? Where will this neighborhood go? It's a resource for you if you have any interest. This information because, as Jeff said, this is a very transparent process. You have access as a viewer to all these files. The town will have access as a viewer, or anybody on with internet access likely will have access to these files that we can connect through the town and Board of Ed website. Are there any questions about the folder for the time being? And this will be your kind of repository for things. I'll organize this a little bit differently as we get up and running. So items from each meeting or subcommittee will be foldered. Make it easy for you to access and locate information.
When I sign on, it comes up saying, "You need permission."
Yeah, it's just been updated recently, so you should have access. And please, I'll give everybody my phone number to contact me at any time. Vin Massiano, when I say that we're, certainly receptive, I know Sean would help you, but this is really our domain. We can help you with that as well. Please. Anybody can see the items in the folder. Sure. Sure. It was just a design point of reference for people. This is not currently publicly accessible. I didn't want to remove permissions until people have seen it. And if there's anything else, any other suggestions that people may want to add or omit from the folder, certainly let me know. All right. We can do that tomorrow. So the projected school project timeline is a couple of you have already referenced, is already kind of obsolete, right? So because we're talking about kind of launching more immediately, at least with the architectural RFQ, request for qualifications. As Jeff said, that'll be, as a colleague of mine used the term intergalactic search. I love that. We'll, far and wide for appropriate and qualified architects to bid on this project. And as Jeff mentioned, and the question came up, is this a two architect firm job? Is this a one architect firm job? And no, based on my personal experience and talking to numerous architects, Tony and Adam and I were at the CABE, the Connecticut Association of Boards of Ed and Superintendent Convention a couple of weeks ago, and I talked to probably 10 architectural firms, and the big firms will give you a great rationale for why they can do two, and smaller firms will give you a great rationale for why they, you shouldn't do one, one for each. You should do one for each firm. So we'll have that opportunity to hear that out and work through that process. And like the request was made, and I think it makes sense. We'll omit this schedule from the folder, and we'll initiate something like this. But I think this, in terms of rough timelines, still gives you a sense of target dates. It's not, like I said, hard and fast, but our intention is to open in the fall of 2026. And I still think, regardless of, where we are in terms of initiating this, that's still probably a target. All right. Jeff, if I could throw it back to you for grant submission process.
Yeah, we pretty much covered this. The process, as I indicated, right now, it's in the hands of the governor's office. The governor's office on December 15th will submit a priority list, and your projects will be on there. It'll go to the General Assembly, and then on February 1, it'll go out of committee from to the full General Assembly. And then, in the meantime, you'll be doing your procurement and working on schematic design. And then in the next legislative session, you'll get the the budget implementer on the last day of the session, which has all of the add-ons in it, and the construction projects priority list is always approved in there. And then your first submittal will be schematic design, and then it's off to the races. What, if you ultimately have an approved grant. Yeah, I mean, you'll see that, you know, the amount of money that you're committing to spend on schematic design is not in the grand scheme of things all that much money, but that's the way it's done. You know, if you wait to see it, you know, you talk to your legislators about whether there's any reason why you're not going to be on that list. I mean, you're not doing anything before December 15th. So December 15th, we'll make sure you're on the list. And there's no reason why the legislature is going to take your projects off the governor's list. That's never happened. Another thing I wanted to mention before I forget, at some point we need to talk about social media, because everybody wants to always do, we're all old, Facebook page. So you got to be very, very, very careful, because people like to put up pictures and progress, and then residents, as they're want to do, will start criticizing you. No back and forth, no illegal meetings on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever your social media platform is. So, but at some point you can do a page, because if you want to do things like, hey, here's the schematic design, get people excited, you know, it's their money. Here's the schedule, let people know what's going on. You have to have some, you know, medium to communicate with people. But you also, the moderator can turn off comments too, and avoid, you know, the temptation to respond, because people will criticize. There'll be something, the color of the roof, you know.
This December 15th submission, there's nothing for us to.
No, you submitted your application before June 30th for 2 grants. And now it's just the governor's probably got the letter ready to go already. And we'll
Yes.
see it. I get a copy of it because I'm on a DAS list. And, you know, there'll be $500 million worth of projects on there.
So we did receive a letter verifying that our application was complete. We've already had communications with DAS's, the Department of Administrative Services, if you're not familiar, Office of School Grants, Construction and Reimbursement. We've had communications with them already. Vin and I are meeting with them again on Friday to actually look at the sites. We're moving along in the process. You know, nothing is a sure thing until we see it in writing, but it's pretty close at this point where we are.
Yeah, OSCGR is in a better place. You may have read things over the last 9 months about some turmoil at OSCGR. They have a new head, Doug Rogers, who used to be at CREC, and is very familiar with the school construction process, very familiar with the grant process, because CREC's projects were paid for 100% by the state. So, you know, he's a good guy, he's a good construction guy. So he took Costa's place at OSCGR, and OSCGR had been moved out of DAS to OPM, and now it's back under DAS. So it's the timing of your project in a number of ways is fortuitous, because it was kind of chaotic up there for a
It's
while.
good to be on a good start then.
Yeah.
So the next item on our agenda is question and answer, and I'll kind of dovetail it into the last item, which is scheduling for our meetings, in the sense that you talked a little bit, Jeff, about, you know, the desire to initiate that RFQ. If we're going to forge ahead with a rep and an architect, certainly with the architect, we want to do it post haste. In terms of executing that, if this body decides we want to move forward with an RFQ for an architect, that is, I'm assuming, done formally through a vote at a meeting.
Yes.
So that would, in essence, necessitate, if we might be able to get together even a quick meeting pre-Christmas to execute that. And then, we can perhaps schedule something more regular in the new year. I just want to throw that out for consideration. And while we consider that and mull that over, does anybody else on the committee have any questions for Sean, each other, myself, Jeff, Vin? Go ahead, please, Chris. Sure.
The reason I asked about the RFQ is because I thought I understood that you have to be preparing that for us. And I'm always of the mindset, at least in my, everything's late before you get started. So you want to make a motion now? I mean, we're going to have to do it or the project just doesn't move forward, right? So how are we on schedule? Do we want to wait? Do we want to make a motion now and just get that rolling?
You don't have to make a motion to have the RFQ prepared. You need to make a motion to issue the RFQ. And so before you can make a motion to issue the RFQ, you have to see it and talk about it. And there's some things in there you need, because we're talking about qualifications, right? So let's say Vin and I come up with a list of qualifications and you say, gee, this says must have successfully completed an elementary school project with a value, and 3 elementary school projects in the last 5 years, each with a value in excess of 50 million. We think it should be 5 projects in the last 10. You know what I'm saying? There's subjective things that you'll have to look at. So the idea would be to get you the draft before the meeting, and then you review it, talk about it at the meeting, vote to issue it, subject to any changes you want to make.
So to get us the draft, I was thinking, do we want to start that?
We will absolutely immediately work on that process. And I'm sure it will be Vin and Jeff working together, probably involved with Sean a little bit to just kind of dot the I's, cross the T's, get that to you ASAP. What's a reasonable timeline, gents, if we were to say we want to give the group here at least several days to review that draft? I don't know how comprehensive the RFQ is, if that's a 48-page document, if it's typically a 3-page document. But what's enough time for you to generate said draft and these guys to review it?
Certainly before the end of next week. I don't know. Vin and I'll talk offline if you want me to just draft it and send it to you. And
Well, if you give me one that you've done,
sure.
I can leapfrog off of that. I actually started drafting
Okay.
an RFQ. I have a preamble done and some other pieces. So if you send me a sample,
Sure, I'll do it tomorrow.
I'll get going, and then we could just, send the document back and forth. Because you've seen our kind of our standard format for an RFP and invitation to bid. So I'll take what you have for an RFQ.
Sure.
Is there any interest in actually getting 3 of them? One for each of the players, so that we.
I didn't hear the question.
Oh, I was thinking in terms of not just getting the RFQ for the architect, but getting the one for the OPM as well as the CM.
Yeah.
Then we can look at them, and then we can decide whether they all go out at once or we can sequence them in a different way.
Is that still doable for you guys? Is that, to generate all 3 drafts by the end of next week? Is
I
that
can do
doable?
it.
Yeah. Okay.
One more question.
Sure.
Before it starts snowing, is it possible to visit the sites? as
Absolutely.
a committee?
Yeah, we could schedule that as a committee. I don't know if you want to do that as a committee. I know it's more efficient to do it as a committee, but
It
with
have
your
to be a close
caveat
meeting.
about the snow, we could also do it independently. With Vin or I, could take 1 or 2 of you to each site. It's up to you guys. One's perhaps more efficient. The other one might be more expedient. To schedule a time where all of us can get there in daylight might be a little tougher, is all I'm saying. So I can send out a doodle poll again or some using Eastern Standard Time, to you, and we can get together. You know, you can select some times that might work for you during daylight, rather than trying to schedule something that we can all do it as a meeting. It might be a little tougher in the. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Good suggestion, Dennis. So we'll get that out. Any other questions? Please, Dennis.
Sorry,
This is like Jeopardy, Dennis. Come on. No, please.
stump the superintendent.
So tough.
Geotech and environmental consultants.
Yep.
Those early rather than later, I think. Just again, because of the snow.
For the application process, we had some geotechnical work done. I can throw that into the folder. And then, you know, the process, Jeff, you're better acclimated to that than I am.
Yeah, the statute that was amended in 2007 to add the RFP process for architects and CMs was amended in 2020 to add all other consultants. Yippee.
Well, that just means that we need one more RFQ.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a big deal. You got plenty of time for the consultants.
We're gonna keep score. I usually win. Is it possible that we create a folder that shows like geotechnical and some of those other things, or SHPO or whatever else had to be done in order to get those sites approved to the level that they're approving now? If they were all there, great, and you get to read every page of every document.
Sure.
I didn't think I saw geotechnical.
Yeah, there's not. And the intent there was to provide enough information to accommodate the group. And, you know, there's a lot of information amassed over the last 7 years that would overwhelm you. So I really tried to highlight information. And so I'll organize folders that are supportive for you to be able to connect with some of the site related information or application related information. And I'll duplicate it too in folders so that if you're looking for a specific topic, all the information should be there for you. And we'll evolve the organization of that, the information is it works for you as we continue to move forward. But I'll definitely add that information. Please.
What town committees do we have to get approval from? What groups are there, and when do we have to get approval?
Planning and zoning. I don't know about wetlands. Are there wetlands on the property?
I know there's wetlands on the north.
So you need a permit to conduct regulated activity from wetlands. Site plan approval from P and Z.
So as we are developing these plans with the architects, we're going to be communicating with the various town committees.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, part of why we would suggest a owner's representative who has a lot of experience navigating the town processes for approval of schools and building that. So, you know, we'll get those different RFQs out by the end of next week. And we need to establish if we can come up with a date for a meeting that week of that last week before the holiday. That would be optimal, I think, even if it's an hour just exclusively focused on RFQs.
Is water and sewer going to work?
Yes.
What about the other side?
I don't know, Vin, details.
Well, no, we would have to run that you're talking about the north end property. I think sewer and gas line both would have to be run into that property. That's part of the work that needs to be done.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
I know the natural gas line is pretty far, but it's somewhere, along Nowder Drive, maybe, one of those properties.
Yeah, the sewer line transfers the property.
Yeah, we'll certainly evaluate sites in great detail as we move forward.
I'm not keeping score, but I have one more question. This is for the other Jeff. There's 7 of us. What's a quorum? 4. Okay. I know some attorneys who would argue that because it's half plus 1. Okay. Fair enough.
And the other thing tended to be an FOI seminar, but FOIC is very, very, very fussy about the quorum issue. In other words, hypothetically, if you were to say, we want to avoid a quorum, we want to do a site visit with 3, a site visit with 3, and a site visit with 1, they would find that that combination is an illegal meeting because you attempted to circumvent the quorum requirement. Same thing, email, right? Somebody might say, well, Jeff says we can't communicate to 7 of us, but what if 3 of us communicate? And no, they're repeatedly, if you read the FOIC decisions, they repeatedly are finding those types of meetings to be illegal because they're doing the people's business and you're simply trying to avoid a quorum to avoid the requirement of doing it in a public meeting. But, if we have 3 people here, we don't have a quorum and we can't have a meeting. So the only thing you can do when you don't have a quorum is read until you have a quorum or have a non-meeting. Yes, sir.
How do you suggest that site
Well, I suggest you notice it as a public meeting.
Or, we can schedule it because getting everybody there in the next several weeks, we can make it public. We can put on the website when the meetings will take place or when the visits will take place and people can show up if they'd like.
Yeah, I mean, the other alternative is, you notice it as a public meeting and anybody that can't make it that day, you just make your own arrangements. I could defend that at the FOIC. If you noticed it as a public meeting and, 5 people showed up and 2 people didn't and then had to come back, that's fine. That's not an issue. The problem is where you start off scheduling 3 separate meetings. That's really the issue that you see in the FOIC decision. So.
So I'll send that stuff out. We'll figure that out. Other questions or thoughts before we kind of probably dig into the hardest part, scheduling? I know, can we look at, and, we do need to have a quorum at every meeting, and I appreciate all of us want to absolutely be at every meeting. But life will probably make that impossible at times. And in that case, I think it'll be important to have conversations if you can't make a meeting, myself included at some point, that we have conversations with the leadership or some other folks that will be at the meeting to be able to provide feedback and participate in advance. But so we can start with the 19th of December. We're just initially trying to schedule that RFQ meeting to review RFQ, and we can talk about time. There is no set time that a meeting has to be held, has to be noticed. We could do it at, 4 o'clock, 7 a.m. or 7 at night. It's based on the flexibility and the needs of the folks here. So do we want to look at the 19th as an option? how does that look for people? And is there a time that is better or worse if we did 7 o'clock again? I'll just throw that out as an option. How does 7 on the 19th look? What in the wide world of sports? I'm going to go buy a lottery ticket. That's insanity. All right, perfect. So 12/19 at 7 p.m. Is Jeff mentioned at the outset that by January 31st, we have to publish a calendar of regular meetings for the year. So if we want to start to take a look at, for me, first and third Thursday of the month is a Board of Education meeting, which kind of take that offline. The council meets 2 Tuesdays a month typically.
Second and sometimes fourth Tuesdays.
So if we want, I could send out, because we can spend all night probably hashing through this. And this is the sort of thing that we can do digitally, the scheduling of meetings. So I could throw out some options that don't conflict with community committees and events. And, you can take some time then to review that and consider the seasons and whatnot, because I know this group will also be getting together over the summer and things like that. And if you have a week's vacation and you're like, well, I wouldn't avoid second Mondays of the month or whatever because you have a trip to Bora Bora planned for a week in July or something. But just take a look at some of the options that we can send you, and we'll pull that as well and try and come to some sort of consensus, perhaps for discussion at our next meeting on the 19th. Does that make sense to people?
I'll be teaching Monday nights through April.
Okay.
Just so we can figure that out.
Sure. And we'll put out different nights of the week and different schedules, and we can try and get some consensus around what works best for everybody.
Does it have to stay the same for 4 years? I mean, if
No.
you realize that his schedule changes to Tuesdays. and that's
Sure.
okay, we can move it.
Absolutely.
Or whatever that kind of-
Yeah, the requirement is we're supposed to post it for a year. So there's a bit of a commitment there, I guess, that we have to enter into, but there's nothing that says we can't ultimately change it or reschedule meetings as things arise throughout. Because as Dennis noted, snow will become a factor, other things will become a factor throughout the next year.
Once a week, once every other week.
What do you recommend, Joe?
Weekly. Once you have a team. Yeah, once you have an architect and a CM. The other thing to keep in mind is there is, and I'm a little bit hesitant to bring this up, but there is also an opportunity if you can't be here physically to participate remotely. And we don't want to have 2 people in the room and 5 people on Zoom, because it becomes difficult building committee actually to meet that way. But there is an opportunity to participate. We would just have to post it as a hybrid meeting.
I think initially we would probably go with 2 meetings a month to schedule for the year, and then add dates as necessary. Preferably on the same night, but it doesn't have to be. Because scheduling, every Tuesday night for the rest of eternity may be a little bit daunting.
So we can do interviews and everything like that as special meetings.
Mhm.
When you do interviews, you recommend that be done by the whole committee, not by the subcommittee?
I do. I think it's for the architect, the CM, and the owner's rep. I think it's critical that the whole committee do the interviews and score.
I would totally agree with that, given the gravity of those decisions for those roles. We're not talking about the paint color at the school. I mean, that's a pretty big decision. I would think it would take the full committee's voice for that.
For some of the other consultants, it's just a committee choice. You know, I don't think the whole committee, because some of the other consultants, it's a very, very narrow skill set, and there's going to be way fewer. I mean, you're not going to be allowed to interview more than 4. You don't have to shortlist 4. You just can't shortlist more than 4. Okay. So it may be like, you know, for special inspector, there may be only 2 qualified respondents. And if the whole committee doesn't want to interview a special inspector, you can assign that to a subcommittee. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Please.
Last one, I promise.
No, that's what.
There's several ex officio members of the committee. Do they go towards the count of quorum, or are they voting members?
Ex officio members are voting members. No. But they have a full authority and voting rights.
Any other questions from the group? I guess before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I want to take this opportunity to thank you again. I'm sure your heads are swimming a little bit more than they were, whatever, an hour and a half, 2 hours ago before we started this meeting. But at the end of the day, I hope that you continue to be filled with enthusiasm and excitement that we heard in those introductions, because we're embarking on a path here that's really incredible for the future of our community. And I thank you in advance for all your work in that effort. We don't have public comment listed on the agenda, but if there's a motion to add public comment, I'd like to entertain that if we could. So moved. Rich, second. Second by Mr. Daddy. All those in favor of adding a public comment? Thank you. It's unanimous. In that case, is there anybody from the comment who would like, or public who would like to comment? Go ahead, Mr. Slocum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, it's on. Terrific. I want to remind you guys, you got to turn on your mics when you talk, but that's okay. My question comes this way, and it has to do with probably the most important committee in the town of Cheshire that we formed in a long time, and their responsibility in public engagement. And Jeff D'Onofrio, this probably goes to you. I mean, we've got elected members of the council, elected members of the Board of Education. You know, we more or less expect to take some heat once in a while, take some praise, whatever comes our way. This is all in the public. What is their role in such engagement? Say, for example, we get down not to the carpet color, but the design of the building. And an architect selection, and there's a member of the community or two, or even the council that you know wants to express their thoughts. How does that play into the role of this committee and their obligations and sensibilities? And just tell us where
Sure.
they cross the line.
Sure. I mean, the committee's a public agency.
Right.
So, you know, the committee can decide to have public comment as a regular agenda item, or add it at a meeting if there's members of the public in attendance. The committee can receive correspondence, email or letter correspondence, or phone calls, or get approached at Big Y, whatever, and bring those comments to the building committee meeting. Typically, you would have a line item for communications on your agenda.
Mhm.
So if you've been contacted by the public with a concern about the project, you would share that with the rest of the committee. So, you know, the building committee, like every other public agency, is, you know, going to interact with the public, whether it be in a meeting or through communications outside of a meeting.
So together with that question, the other half of it is, you know, as an elected member of the community boards and the council, we may at some point want to just get updates without having to go to YouTube and watch a meeting update. What we can simply call for that, I presume. and get an update from whoever they would designate, just to keep us up to speed.
Yeah, I could tell you in most towns, the chair of the building committee
Mhm.
does a monthly report to the town council.
So that could be part of our regular agenda.
Yeah.
Once the steamboat gets rolling here.
Yep.
And, okay. I just thought it was better to ask these questions in this forum, this introductory sort of
Sure.
forum, for the education of all. And also the development of your agendas going forward. So I appreciate that. And I'll use this as an opportunity. Thank you all. I know you all talked to me and Tony and others through the process, but thank you so much. I guess you got the drill tonight. You know, it's going to be a big deal. It's going to be a real big deal, guys. We do appreciate it in advance. And hopefully you don't have hell to pay for anything you do. So thank you. And thanks for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Any other members of the public, please step to the microphone. Ms. Harrigan? Doctor?
Thank you, Ann Harrigan, Board of Education, and I just wanted to take a brief moment of your time because I know adjournment is what I'm competing for right now. Just to thank you. I was so impressed when you went around and introduced yourselves. Your qualifications are amazing, and I hope to get to know you, each of you, a little bit better over the next several years, I guess. But I already have a lot of confidence in all of you, and I think this is going to go beautifully. And I'm just really impressed with who's sitting up here tonight. And I was impressed through this meeting tonight with your demeanor, your questions. I have a really good feeling about this. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this committee. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Dr. Harrigan.
Thank you, Dr. Sola.
And
Thank you, Ann. This will be really quick. Tony Perugini, we all met, and thank you for sticking through the interview process, and thank you for signing up for this. When I first got on the board that first night, there were a ton of acronyms. I couldn't figure out what they were. So for those of you that might be new to this, don't worry about it. That's going to come naturally. I can tell you, having worked with Dr. Solon, Vincent, Sean, and Jeff at D'Onofrio, not just here in the town, but Jeff is also part of my company at the Water Authority. You have an excellent team here, as well as the town staff. I would say it's top notch. You can get all the support you need from anyone involved. You have the board's commitment and support. So I think you're going to do a bang up job. Some board members might be attending your meetings. Tim and I tossed the idea on liaisons, but since everyone's interested, there's really no point into that. There'll be plenty of people here to listen and report back to the bodies. Our Board of Education business meetings will have a standing agenda item on school business committee updates, which we'll use a report. So any information you need, any questions you have from the board or for the board, you can certainly talk to me or funnel them to Jeff. But I just want to thank you. This is probably the biggest project in Cheshire. Actually, it is very important, and I applaud you all for stepping up and making a time commitment. Sounds like a lot of work, but I think once you get in the rhythm, you can see it's very, very exciting, very rewarding. So thank you again.
thank you. All right. Looks like I'll take a motion to adjourn our meeting. Mr. Rio, any second? Mr. Neth, all in favor? All right. Thank you very much.